Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenmara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, since Halloween or Samhain is coming up this week, let's take a journey to hell. Or at least Hades, maybe not quite full torture there. But tonight I'm going to go over Cerberus. And for some weird reason, thought I had already went over Cerberus, but I'd wrote out an outline, and that's as far as I'd gotten, so we'll just continue to go through this last major labor of Hercules. And this is kind of an interesting creature. For being one of the most popular creatures in Greek art, as far as he's on pots, he's on buildings, he was carved everywhere, Cerberus was very, very popular, but his story is really not that long as far as all the details that are involved. But the interesting thing about Cerberus, there's no record of his death, so he's still roaming around somewhere. But to start with, this particular beast actually does have a parentage and some family. Cerberus's mom was Echidna, and his dad was Typhon. And you can check out the videos that I've done on those two already. And Cerberus did have siblings, which is, I think I've talked about that a little bit in other videos. Chimera was one of his siblings. The Hydra of Lerna and Orthus were the primary ones that are referenced in most of the myths. And these are all beings of an extreme strength and power, but all of them were subdued by Hercules' strength. And the interesting thing is, according to a lot of the lore, especially the lore associated with Hercules, he actually ended these particular creatures, but he doesn't end Cerberus. We'll just say that right now, because I've already kind of given away the ending. But the basics of Cerberus's myth, and I dug around a little bit, and there's a few places where it references, to find out more, read so-and-so's book, and trying to find it online without buying the Kindle version or something was a little bit of a trick. So what we have is a generalized version of his story. So hopefully that's not too obnoxious for everybody. And tonight's GT kombucha, the Synergy one, it is Living in Gratitude. It's their seasonal one, and that's the one that is apple, turmeric, carrot, and spices. It's kind of like cinnamon, nutmeg, little cloves in there. But if you have not heard about Cerberus, he is a vicious, bloodthirsty, three-headed guard dog guarding the gates to hell or Hades, kind of like this guy. And Apollodorus, who was one of the writers for some of the stories back in the day, he said he was even more terrifying than just having a basic 3 heads. He claimed that Cerberus had a tail that was a dragon or a serpent. I should learn how to spell because I totally spelled that wrong. And along his back there were snake heads, and it's kind of like his hackles. If you've ever seen a dog hackles stand up, those were all snakes. And I think, well, this is the dragon tail. At least you can see his dragon tail over here. I found a couple of really cool pictures on DeviantArt, but as I've said before, I'm not going to steal someone else's pictures when it comes to that, so you can go check out DeviantArt. Just punch in Cerberus, and it's pretty cool. Those guys on DeviantArt are amazing artists, that's all I have to say. Really envious, personally. Another source claims that he had as many as 50 heads, which is kind of an odd thought, but I mean, considering his parentage, not that far off. There's another source that says he has over 100 heads. One source said that Cerberus had a dog head, just a normal, like, kind of large dog head, St. Bernard, German Shepherd, pit bull type head, but it had hundreds of snakes around it, kind of like a lion's mane of snakes, which I thought was pretty cool, and I could not find a good picture of that. And honestly, if we're going to be playing the game of multiple snake heads, let's not get too wild here. That's more of what Typhon would look like, not so much his son, but having the snakes on the body, especially around the mane and down the back, does fit with the child of Typhon and Echidna. But I'm going to stick with the mainstream view of 3 heads because that tends to be the story that was the most common. There were other versions of it where the head nut count went up, but for the most part, the majority of the art and the majority of the stories said 3 heads. So we're sticking with that. There was also multiple references that I found talking about his eyes that flashed of fire or lightning. So, you know, gigantic 3-headed hellhound, but he had eyes that flared fire or lightning. Keep talking, I like this dog already. And there are those who think that he had a snake-like tongue in each of his heads, owing to the parentage of snake-like monsters, Echidna and Typhon. And according to historians, the first 3-headed depiction was around 500 BC, and that's a depiction as in art. But prior to that, they were still stories, just not a lot of art about him. The art that did exist showed 3 wolves, not so much a 3-headed dog. So, there are also some who think that Cerberus had venom in his bites, which is just awesome. And his fur was black or black with spots like the black of a black leopard or black leopard or jaguar, where they have the black, but then it has the little black circlets through it. And I kind of think that that's a cool looking pelt for a dog anyway. So, where did this particular nightmare puppers come from? When 2 entities we've already met, and I've mentioned before, Typhon was his father and Echidna was his mother. She was known in Greece as the mother of all monsters, so it kind of fits considering what Cerberus looks like. I personally wouldn't call him a monster. I think he looks cool, but people didn't think that way. As a power couple with their spawn, even the Olympians were actually scared of Typhon and Echidna, and they refused to make moves except for one time. There was a move made against Typhon, which unleashed Echidna's wrath, and bad things followed, especially for the Olympians and most of the people of Greece at the time. And because Cerberus had this dark, very powerful parentage, he kind of served as like the best option for a guardian to the underworld. And as we've already talked about, Hercules had already taken out several of the other children of Typhon and Echidna, but Cerberus was the 12th labor. So this is where we bring Hercules and his chaos into this mess. The king Herasimp, Eurystheus, don't like him, wanted to see the guard dog of hell. That's it. He just wanted to see it. So he tasked Hercules with capturing the hellhound and bringing him to Eurystheus. And this was not the greatest idea, but Eurystheus, the king, and Hera were furious. Hercules had literally conquered every single challenge that were impossible, should have been deadly, no one could have done, brought shame on you, shame on your house, all that kind of stuff. None of it worked. Hercules walked away from every single one of them, which is awesome for our stories. So this was like their last great hope, because no one goes to Hades, to hell, Tartarus, whatever you want to call it, and returns, especially not a mortal. Hercules at this point was still mortal. He was still human. He was a demigod, so he had some supernatural powers, but he was human. He was something that could be killed and died. So this was like, we've got him this time. He'll never get out of Hades. Um, Hercules also knew he was mortal and knew this was going to be an impossible task, even for a demigod. So he was willing to try anything, and the first thing he did was make some preparations. Important ones, because you're going into the underworld. You can go see your uncle Hades. You kind of need to, get some things straight before you head out. And so he went off to Elysius to learn the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, there's a lot of people who've talked about these. I may not be saying the name right. That's fine. These mysteries were said to be given to man by Persephone and Demeter. Persephone is Hades' wife. So there we have connection. And Demeter would be Hades' mother-in-law. Great. And it was believed that these mysteries were to grant a mortal soul happiness in the underworld. It was basically, if you could complete the mysteries, this would basically set you up for the rest of your existence in the underworld. Like, you would not have to worry about pain and suffering, because these mysteries showed you the proper ways, the proper prayers, the proper actions to, at least this is the lore that goes with them, to be able to survive and actually thrive in the next life. Now, not all who applied or sought out the Eleusinian mysteries were granted this knowledge, because it was such a tightly regulated and very strict code of secrecy. Most of what we think we know about the Eleusinian mysteries is what a few people have channeled. There's a few documents, but not much. There are people who have claimed to have found the entirety of them. It's a little questionable if that's actually true, so we're going to go with there's some knowledge there, but it's not thorough and it's not complete. There's some theories out there that say a completion of the Eleusinian mysteries would actually give you immortality, because death had no more power. Okay, that I'm cool with. It's alchemy in its purest form, if you want to go there. But as far as the actual documented rituals and ceremonies and prayers, maybe not. Either way, the priest did choose to initiate Hercules into the mysteries. Yay for Hercules. And this made his stay in Hades better if he ended up messing up while he was there and had to stay. Now that he was spiritually prepared to enter the realm of Hades or Hell, he would journey to Tainaron. Sorry, I even wrote it out phonetically, and then I don't know how to read my own writing. So Tainaron in Laconia. And this was actually a well-known cave. It was thought to be the entrance to Hades for years after even the Greeks passed out of control of the area. And here he would enter into the gateway of Hades. But it wouldn't go alone. And this was a little bit unique for the Hercules myths. Hermes and Athena actually were there to guide him. Hermes was well versed in the paths of Hades, and it is said that he was a guide for souls who had passed over to enter the gates without a lot of obstruction. Athena wanted to make sure Hercules was safe. She was his patron for years. Athena was always looking out for Hercules. So he basically had his two best people with him. Many tests would Hercules overcome to gain access to the gates and to the heart of the realm. Tests of strength, wrestling opponents, overcoming monsters and men, and finally, after all of this nonsense, we still haven't got to Cerberus yet, he gets into the heart of Hades and goes to meet his uncle Hades, which makes it really tricky when your city is named after the person who controls it. But that's what it is. So, an interesting little side note here, and I found a couple of these through here, so we'll toss those in as I go. Hades in Greece, in the Greek myths and lore, would be associated with the Roman god of death and destruction and chaos, Pluto. Chaos is a little questionable, but definitely death and destruction. Just a little tidbit I ran across, because I was like, you can pretty much line up all the other deities from Greek and Rome, and I could not remember for the life of me who Hades was associated with in the Roman pantheon. It was actually Pluto. And Pluto's still a planet. I don't care what they say. Hercules would ask Hades for the great beast, Cerberus. And I can only guess Hades' response. The god of darkness and death had a monstrous guard dog that guarded his domain, and his mortal nephew wanted to borrow the beast for a day or two. Okay. I can only imagine that Hades had a good chuckle, being his, doting uncle, like, you want to borrow my guard dog? Okay, that's like borrowing a junkyard dog. What are you doing? But Uncle Hades did consent, and the theory, or the story goes, yeah, you can borrow my dog, if, and only if, Hercules could overcome Cerberus by brute force alone. No weapons allowed. Muscle against beastly muscle. There's also a side story here that said that Hades refused to let Hercules have anything to do with this, and that Hades would actually form a bow and arrow out of stone and rosin and shoot Hades. Hades figured out he knew how to build a sword or a weapon in hell where there was no weapons, and let him have Cerberus anyway. But the main story says that Hades agreed to let Hercules take the dog. So Hercules wanted to be free of the king and, by extension, his psycho stepmother Hera, so off he went with no weapons on him. But in most versions of what I found, he was allowed to take his Nemean lion cape. The lion cape is the cape that was impervious to all slings, arrows, and damage forever. It was an immortal's coat that he skinned off the lion. So Hades sent Hercules off to where he knew Cerberus would be basically cooling his heels. Because Hades, even though he controls hell, or we'll call it hell, he actually lived kind of on the outskirts of it. He didn't live at the center like a lot of modern day people think. So for him to approach Hades, he actually wasn't in the full realm of hell yet. He was kind of on the outskirts. And Hades would send Hercules to the area of Acheron, which is one of the 5 rivers running through the realm of the dead. This is one of the other ones. The other one that's really well known is the river Styx. So he's getting into Hades at this point. And when he got there are massive gates. And at the gates, Cerberus waited. Not friendly in the slightest. It was said that Hercules leapt upon the dog's back and forced the 3 great heads into submission, using the lion's hide to basically protect himself from the teeth, but also his sheer brute strength was able to basically choke out the dog. Hercules would not leave this particular situation unscathed in this assault, because the beautiful dragon tail would land a couple of bites on Hercules himself. The tail, though, suspiciously, is not venomous. That's what I kept running across, so that's why he could get bit by it and not get hurt, which is good. But after he finally put the dog into submission, and anyone who's ever worked with big dogs knows about training dogs, that can take some time to submit a dog. Can you imagine one that's a hellhound? Yeah, no. But Cerberus would eventually submit to his new master, because that's really what you're doing, is proving who's the boss there. Another version, and it's not as much fun. I like the whole, muscle versus muscle, man versus beast concept. This one is a little more genteel. I feel like this was something that was written later to weaken the story of Hercules, and that was when Hades heard that Hercules was coming. Persephone, his wife, was overjoyed. She hadn't seen her cousin in years, so she was all excited, and She welcomed Hercules with open arms, and because she knew of his task, she had already chained and fully submitted Cerberus, and so it was, he shows up, little dinner party, yay, we haven't seen you in forever, here's the leash, and away they went. It's really not that fun. It's kind of the boring version of the story. I like the brute force one better. What is interesting in this particular line of lore, though, Hercules leashes or chains the beast and took him out of Hades to the king. A couple of different versions. Some say he drug him out, which would make sense because Cerberus was not a small beast. Others say he put him on his shoulders and carried him out. Okay, Hercules was a big guy, but he wasn't no 12-foot tall, 900-pound god. He was a mortal. Like, yeah, he might have been 6 or 7 feet tall, but he wasn't that big. As far as, like, you're not packing a monstrous beast out on your shoulders. So the fact that they are like, oh, he tossed him over his shoulder and hauled him out like he was a sack of potatoes, no, not quite. Anyway, Hercules, because this was such a rare occurrence, actually would parade the chained Cerberus through the streets of various Greek cities before he would actually arrive at the palace of Eurystheus. Really cool thing here. Cerberus did not remain in the land of the living for long. Obviously, he was on loan. Hercules would return the beast to Hades to resume guarding the gates of hell. No harm, no foul, except Cerberus's pride was a little bit damaged, and I'm sure he took his shame or embarrassment out on random souls that were just being annoying in his eyes in Hades. So there's another version which could have been more fun but was not as popular in the literature that I could dig up, was that Cerberus eventually broke his bonds and escaped through the land, causing all sorts of chaos until he could find one of the gateways into the underworld from our world. But the more common, more accepted story, the one that has the most art about it, was Hercules who actually would take Cerberus back into the underworld and release him on his own. So that's kind of the basics of the Hercules side of the story. But there's some fun little details that we can toss in here just for something to think about. The name Cerberus is possibly a pre-Greek name. So Cerberus was basically adopted into and made popular in Greece, but there's a theory, and has a little bit of foundation in going back in history more, that this was an older name. Some speculate that Cerberus was related to a Sanskrit word, so we're going to India now, that would basically meant spot, which is even funnier because that means Hades named his dog Spot. It just makes me giggle every time I run across that. There's other interpretations which are a little bit more, how do we say this properly? Academic. We'll go with that word, academic. Where the word Cerberus could actually be rooted back to a word that says the growling one or one who growls, which would work too. I mean, if you think about what Cerberus did there, that would make sense. I personally prefer Spot because it makes me giggle. Another couple of possibilities is that the name Cerberus meant flesh eater or evil from the pit of Hades, and I'll let you guys decide what you think of which name you prefer, and I'm not even going to try to break down the linguistics of that. I went through pages of that kind of stuff, and by the end of it, I was so confused. I'm like, we're just going to take the English words and what the original terms meant, because I am not trying to decipher everything from Celtic, Druidic type phrases, Greek, Roman. There was the Sanskrit words where I'm like, I'm so lost, I don't know how to say this. So I gave you the English definitions. Fun fact though, Cerberus is known for creating a very poisonous and deadly plant. Did not know this, and I have studied herbs for years. Didn't know this part. Lore has it that Cerberus created aconite. And it's interesting how they say he did it. It is said that once Cerberus came out of the underworld and the sun struck him, he vomited violently, and spewed forth bile that poisoned the local plants, which eventually would make them become aconite. It was said that the sun's stress and the heat was so intense on him, he vomited. Another version of it was not just bile, but foam and bile out of his mouth upon the land. The land itself repulsed this, and as it pushed away the toxin, it grew a plant called aconite. Sounds fun, and aconite is very, very poisonous. Didn't realize that Cerberus had a hand in making it. There are some out there, and we'll let you speculate who. I think I do mention it in my notes, but we'll let you think about this for a second. There are those out there who want to make Cerberus not supernatural. He was just a dog, nothing special. Dog or wolf, it depends on the story. And of course they would do that, because why would you want to believe in a three-headed dog or anything exciting like that? I'm sorry, but I like the idea of a three-headed dog. That's just cool. Other than if it was a big drool bucket, I don't want that. They're bad enough when they only have one head. But these people are the ones that claim that in the depths of these caves were actually highly venomous serpents that they would call the hounds of Hades. And I'm going to stick with a three-headed dog. Oh, and why they go with that thought as well is there's a couple of the more obscure lore that has popped up more recently said that Cerberus was actually a three-headed snake. Sounds a lot more like the Nagas in India, but we're going to go with the dog because it just fits the descriptions. All of the artwork coming out of Greece at this time was a three-headed dog. The three-headed serpent thing, I feel like they're just trying to tie that back into some of the India beliefs, especially tying it into the concept of the Naga and that Sanskrit word that basically meant spot. So we're going to leave India and the Nagas over there. We're going to keep our three-headed dog or three-headed wolf, whatever you want to see it as, over here in Greece. There's another piece of lore that says that Cerberus was just a basically normal dog, a little bit big and had a little bit of a supernatural aspect to him in that respect. And he had acquired 2 pups, and that's where the 3 heads came from, because he actually controlled the other 2 kind of like telepathically, so it was like 3 acting as 1. I'm going to stick with normal Cerberus. I like the 3-headed dog part. I do like the concept of him having pups, each of their pups having 3 heads. That would be cool. Later, there would be philosophers, of course there would be, that would make Cerberus nothing more than an allegorical lesson. We must not believe in the supernatural. And they would claim that Cerberus was a flesh-devouring bacteria that was in soil. They didn't call bacteria, but that's what it was. And so when you would put a body in the grave, Cerberus would devour the flesh and leave the bones, but also would dissolve the human nature that went along with it. Therefore, Hercules overcame his human nature that allowed him to access a more divine belief in God and himself. Okay. They would also say that Cerberus was 3 parts of fallen man: nature, cause, and accident. Not exactly sure how cause and accident fall into the aspect of fallen man. Accident, you can trip, but that doesn't really speak much to a fallen soul. Like, how did you accidentally slip and condemn yourself to hell? That's weird. And you could say that there were only those 3 aspects, but they also would talk about things like it was the 3 aspects of humanity: baby, youth, and elder. And to me, I feel like this is just another explanation for the triple-faced god or goddess. And I'm sorry, just let us have our 3-headed dog. Stop. We understand your philosophical nonsense trying to demonize or restrict or somehow make smaller the myths and lores. Let us have our myths. The myths are what keep us hopeful, and honestly, you learn a lot more from a myth than you do from being instructed by a teacher. The myth brings in adventure and fun. It also brings in fear. It also has that primal response in our minds. So learning from a textbook just doesn't quite cut it. Let us have our myths. Later, church leaders would go to further demonize and demean and weaken the lore of Cerberus by saying it was the 3 parts of hatred. Here we go again with these weird terms of hatred: natural, causal, and accidental. How do you have accidental hatred? Like natural hatred, I don't like that. That makes sense. Causal hatred, they did that, therefore I hate them. How do you get accidental hatred? I could not find a justified concept on this. There was a few random weird things where I was like, this doesn't fit a logical mind. Hatred is hatred. Anyone wants to figure out what accidental hatred means, let me know, because I do not comprehend, from what I could find, what that actually means. Natural, I get that. Causal, understood. Accidental, giant question mark. Like, were you just throwing words out to get 3 at this point? Like, come on. Vatican mythographers, didn't know that was a word, but I found out something new, also made some interesting associations. The 3 brothers, god brothers of Greece, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, each carried a 3-part weapon. For Zeus, it was the 3-forked thunderbolt. For Poseidon, it was the 3-pronged trident. And they would assume that the 3-headed Cerberus was Hades' weapon. Not quite the lore that I've ever read, but it's a cute theory. In this particular path, Cerberus was a divine weapon in the form of a 3-headed dog. Still cool, not historically accurate according to the older lore. And this is the type of stuff I'm talking about. These sets of 3 points, these set of 3, cannot talk today, point to divine nature in all of these ancient myths. And that I will agree with. But there was also some talk of Hades having a very unique weapon, and that the 3 brothers were actually gifted these weapons, or built these weapons by Hephaestus, the great blacksmith. So each one of them had a unique skill, talent, and weapon. Personally, just because I can't find anything to justify it, I don't see Cerberus as being a weapon. I think he was his own entity, birthed from Echidna and Typhon, so we'll go with that. Now, do the myths and lore of Cerberus die with the Greeks and, by extension, the Romans? Actually, no. Cerberus stays very active through history, which is true because he never actually died. And Typhon and Echidna, being immortal themselves, their children were all birthed into immortality as well, with the exception that they could be killed, but they wouldn't die of old age. So, Cerberus is still roaming around. Dante makes Cerberus the guardian of the 3rd circle of hell in Dante's Divine Comedy in the section called Inferno, guarding the gluttons of life and death. And this would be the place where Cerberus would actually rend and flay the flesh of those who could not be satisfied in life and would be perpetually lacking in hell. Okay. If you like anime-styled movies or video games, and I could not find the video game, I think it's out of print. There's a movie and a video game called Dante's Inferno. It might be on Steam or something, but it's not. I couldn't find the discs anymore. It used to be on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Anyway, the movie's still available, and I did link that in the description if you're interested. The movie is actually kind of odd because it 3 different art styles through the entire movie. So you'll watch the different anime or animation styles as the different characters go through. It's kind of fun, and it does give you a different view of Dante's Divine Comedy. They only did through Inferno. I really wish that this particular production company would do the next 2, and I cannot think of what the middle one is. I know the last one's Paradiso, but I wish they would do all 3 sections because I think it would be a pretty cool story. Anyway, um, also Cerberus shows up in TV series like the Hercules, the Legendary Journeys, which I've talked about a few times before. He also shows up, and I don't remember this in this game, and I have played this game, which is the Final Fantasy VIII game. Apparently, he shows up in one of the last few levels. I don't remember that personally, but that's just my memories, not focused on games. And also in the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or the Philosopher's Stone, the first book, Fluffy, the name of the three-headed dog that Hagrid collects, is actually based off of Cerberus and his bloodline. The other thing with Cerberus was he didn't just guard the gates of hell. It wasn't to keep people out. That's the unique part of Cerberus. He actually would welcome them in, the souls that were coming in, be like, ooh, I'm excited. That's where the dog part comes into me. Like, I can see that being more accurate than a serpent. And so they would be welcomed in pleasantly. It's when they would go to leave that Cerberus is more, let's say the more hostile side of Cerberus would show up, was when he was when people would go to leave, and that's where he would actually devour souls and deposit them back in the heart of Hades. So the other fun part of Cerberus, and this keeps popping up in my feed on the internet, and it's fun. It's a little web comic. Why did I not write the name of this thing down? Oh, I did, just not in the right spot. It's called Goofy God Comics. I linked one of the little strips in the comments down below. It is so cute. The story of how Cerberus shows up with Death or Hades is kind of sad, and that part was like, aw. But it shows basically how Death has got this soft spot for this three-headed dog, and then this dog actually helps him court Persephone, and he always calls him Cerby. That's the reason I said that. It is kind of cute, but this is one of the images. You can see this is Death over here, because Persephone, being Demeter's daughter, gave Cerby a plant. Plants don't do so well in hell. There's no sunshine there. And this is one of those things, but you see the three different faces. There's one that's like really intelligent, one that's kind of like moderate, and then you've got this little dude down here on the bottom. He's kind of the dorky one of the three heads, but it is I don't know. It makes me giggle every time I run across that little comic, because it's a really fun strip. The guy who's developing it obviously has got a good imagination. But they don't just focus on Persephone, Demeter, and Hades. They also bring in Zeus and Atlas and a few other entities and deities. And he does it in just a way that kind of makes it funny. It's not by any means or any thought to be accurate to history, but it is kind of a fun little read. And I want to say he's got like 50 or 60 strips out now. So if you feel interested in kind of having a giggle, go check it out in the description. Support other artists and stuff like that. And with that, we will kind of wrap up the historical side of Cerberus, but we will now hop over to, where to go? The tarot aspect of myth and tarot. So we went over the myth, so now we know a bit more about Cerberus, hopefully. Kind of what his purpose was, how Hercules tied in, and for as popular as he tends to be in various novels that I have read over the years, various movie references, which there is a movie that's actually dedicated to Cerberus in the linked comments, or in the description down below. Like I said, talking is not my strong point today. I have this movie somewhere in my collection, and I just remember as I was flipping through some of the scene screenshots to kind of trigger a memory as to what this movie was about. The more I was flipped through them, I'm like, oh yeah, this is one of those really bad B movies that I like so much. So It's probably not going to be for everyone. It's classified as a horror film. Kind of crosses a lot of lore because you go from Greece to Attila the Hun looking for a sword, kind of like the Sword of Destiny, but not quite. It's all over the place. It's a fun movie if you want to just completely disconnect for about an hour and a half. So, something if you're interested, you can check that out. Otherwise, we will get started on our tarot reading for Cerberus. Now, this is if Cerberus is sitting across the table from me, and this reading would be for him. And mind you, Cerberus never died. Unlike a lot of the other beings that we've talked about, there's not an end to Cerberus. He's still guarding the gates of the underworld, or the gates of hell, to this day. So, keep that in mind as we go along here. The card that is the significator, this is Cerberus in this moment, this is the totality of who he is now, is the Eight of Swords. And what I'm getting with this one is there's some chaos, there's some illusions that are trying to be held up, almost as if there's something that he is trying to not allow to fall. He likes the vision or the version of himself that he's got right now. There's, especially with this deck, you're seeing this indication of this movement, the wind. The wind is actually logic and reason trying to help cut through the illusions. The swords are also an air element. So this is something that is a challenge to his current viewpoint in the world. So where he's at right now is kind of in a state of confusion and chaos. Like, he's not quite sure what his current stance is in the world. I mean, I'm pretty sure by the end of this, he's going to have a better version of what's going on. But in this particular moment in time, there's a little bit of chaos, like a little bit of uncertainty. That's what I'm seeing. So the energy that crosses him, the thing that is kind of an obstacle or a challenge, is the Nine of Chalices. And whenever I see this particular card in this deck, I feel like this is like, oh, you're happy, but you're not really sure what you're doing. It's kind of this naive energy, like you've come so far, you're almost there. You don't have to work anymore because it's just the universe is lined up for you. So the thing that's kind of his challenge is not being willing to put in the effort to keep going, not really stepping forward to express himself in the modern world. So you're getting this vibe that's crossing him as your challenge is to break free of this, I don't want to work anymore and I don't have to. Yeah, you do. We all do. Step up, bud. So his higher self is, I'll have to edit this one, the Queen of Pentacles. I love this deck, but where my finger is, you can put two and two together. The Queen of Pentacles is saying, your higher self energy, basically, is saying, you have a great path ahead of you, Cerberus. You have a great deal of things to look at, to expand on. Your journey is not over, and there are great things coming forward in your future. With the Queen of Pentacles, you're getting this energy of hearth and home, so there's stability, there's foundation here. This is a time for him to really put forth the effort because he's laying a new foundation, and his higher self is saying, you've got everything kind of lined up. The world is ready for the new myths. The world is ready for the new lore. That's where you're feeling confused, like, where do I stand in this? And the Nine of Chalices that's crossing you is saying, don't get too comfortable because things are growing. The Queen of Pentacles is saying, dude, you've got this. Let's keep this momentum moving because you're coming back into the forefront of people's consciousness. So the thing that is his kind of his shadow self, his subconscious energy, is the Magician. And that's an odd one to have as a shadow unless you look at kind of the thought pattern. The Magician says you have all the tools you need to complete the path that you're on. Well, the path that Cerberus was on is old. So he's still clinging to his old tools, but we're in a more modern era. So Cerberus needs to step up his game and actually maybe trade in or upgrade the tools that he has because they don't quite fit the world that we live in anymore. And that's where his shadow's coming in, is like, no, these are fine tools. You don't need to upgrade. But his higher self, the Queen of Pentacles, is like, seriously, dude, those don't work anymore. You have got to update some stuff. You have got to step into the 21st century, so to speak. So you've got this odd dynamic between upper and lower going on. One's saying, we're moving forward, we got things to do. The other one is actually saying, we don't need to learn anything else because we already know it all. But the magician in the tarot is number 1. It's not number 22. You're not done learning. You just have a couple of tools. Your journey still lies ahead. So his history, and as an immortal, we'll go back about 200 years, is number 4, the Emperor. His energy for his history is very much masculine dominated, and this is actually a pretty good description or depiction of one of the versions of Hades. So you've got this, he's always been under the watchful eye of the god of death. He's always been under the watchful eye of some deity above him. Even though he's a full-grown being, by his nature, Cerberus is not to be on his own. He needs to have that leader, that guide, is what I'm hearing for his past. And in the past 200 years, there's been so much fear and nightmare and terror associated with the divine masculine that's protecting him, Hades, or hell, or death, or however you want to see it, that it's almost like I'm feeling that this has been pulling him back a little bit, like keeping him in the shadows. He doesn't want to step forward and actually kind of reveal himself anymore. So his future, of course we have to, is number 14, which is the Temperance card. And this is his immediate future, the next 200 years or so. This is where he needs to step up. If he wants to really make a place in the world that we live in today, that doesn't mean bad things, this is the time for him to maybe find a new balance, find out more about himself. Now we're talking about a beast, but Typhon and Echidna were fully conscious and sentient beings. Typhon was a little questionable, but they were still beings. And when you look at the other children they spawned, they all had an intelligence to a point. So we'll assume that Cerberus does as well. And his future with the Temperance is saying there's a balance that he's not quite there. He's been so focused on always obeying his master in the past, and his task was to keep the souls in hell. But what if your task is to educate them so that they can actually uplift themselves through their prayers, through their meditations, kind of like the Eleusinian Mysteries, and step up into a higher state? Eventually, you wouldn't need to guard hell anymore, would you? His attitude. This is kind of him in a nutshell right now. Like, where is he at mentally? How's he showing up? We have the King of Pentacles. So we've got this... I'm not sure I'm going to do this. The King of Pentacles with this deck is showing that he's trying to hold on to something that's trying to escape. He's trying to hold on to this dream of the past, this concept of that was then, this is now, and I need to hold on to the then, because what happens if now is not good? Yeah, but the King of Pentacles is saying, you've already been there, you've already done that. If you're not clinging to something, you're actually going to get more of it. So his attitude right now is a little bit of, I've been there, I've done that, I've amassed this position, and I'm not quite ready to sacrifice any part of that to move forward. But to move forward, you're going to have to adapt and grow, and that could equal sacrificing parts of his position or past to be able to move forward into the newer future. The environment that he is currently in is the Ten of Chalices. He's almost, that's a weird way of phrasing it, he's almost drunk on his own brew. Like, he's been doing the same thing, and he's really good at it. Like Cerberus, you really can't find through history and lore, a myth in particular, a better being to protect that realm. Yeah, you've got like the ferryman, you've got some of these other beings that kind of heard things the right direction, but it's not the same as Cerberus. So he knows his environment is basically, oh, you're doing so well, you're just an amazing being, keep doing you, boo, type energy. So his environment's very much about promoting and uplifting him. It's just not feeding what his soul's desire is at this point. And that doesn't mean it's going to change his task or his job, but maybe there's an expansion that could be coming through for him. His hopes and fears is the One of Wands. Of course we do. And the One of Wands says this is that fire. There's a new passion that's starting to ignite within. It's a little bit fearful because you have to give something up for something new to come in. That's just how life works. It's the balance of energy. You can't keep shoving in unless you allow something to leave. So he's got this new energy, this new vibe he's trying to work with, which is that getting to a point where he's no longer needed in hell so he can go do something else. But he also likes to see the souls improve. There's parts of the lore and the myth that talk about the fact that he's not just there to be a monster. He's also there to kind of comfort the new souls that are nervous. You can't leave. That's when the anger comes out. But it doesn't say that he's constantly on the warpath. It usually talks like he's just the guardian of the gate type thing. So we do have this energy of something new, something different he wants to try, and being the One of Wands, it's saying this is really new even to him. So it's not something he's been thinking about for too long. It's kind of catching fire in him at the moment. So your overall outcome for Cerberus is the Knight of Wands. When things start to move, they're going to move fast. We have this fiery nature. This is the most active of the knights in the minor arcana. So this is really saying when these pieces fall into place, it's going to happen fast. It's going to happen right now, and it's going to happen in a hurry. So Cerberus, he's getting kind of ready for things to move, and when it does pop off, it's going to happen real fast. How that shows up for our realm, because we're not in the underworld, at least I don't think we are, could be interesting if you really want to think about it like that. Because if the underworld shifts and changes and stuff starts to move around there, there's no such thing as moving in isolation. The ripple effects could be pretty impressive. So with that, we'll wrap up Cerberus's basic reading. And if you guys have any thoughts, questions, opinions, ideas, let me know in the comments down below. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on the video. Like I said, let me know what your thoughts are. If you've other lore or other things that maybe could be added into the Cerberus myth, let me know. If you have other critters, beasts, or etc. you want to look a little deeper into, also post those in the comments down below because I do check those out. And with that, I will let you guys go. Have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you in the next video. Button, there it is.